Call to order.
Maybe wonder if it's not working.
Dr. Day, Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge of Allegiance. All stand, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. I don't have any chair's comment today, so we move to item D, approval of agenda.
I would like to make an amendment to the agenda.
Unless you have unanimous consent.
Right, and is in keeping with, and that's what I'm hoping to have. I know from the very beginning, this school year, that was one of our aims, is to make sure we heard the voice of the parents, the teachers, and all. And we have some members of the Sandusky school here, and I would like to give them at least 30 minutes.
I support that.
But it has to be a unanimous vote.
Well, I oppose the motion.
Okay, well,
We've had a lot of public comment up to now. The purpose of this meeting is just to review the process.
I understand the purpose of this meeting, but I also want to make sure that the Sandusky members, they were not on the fourth, that scenario you had, nor were they on the first one. And they were just blindsided, and the only time they've been able to speak was to city council, unless they're gonna wait till next week.
Dr. Carter, the rule is clear, unanimous consent. If he's going to oppose, then we don't have a unanimous consent.
If I may just, in the interest of allowing all the community members to feel that their voice has been heard. Frankly, I think Sandusky folks, we had a number of, I don't necessarily agree with the language that there was a broad or blind siding, but I do feel from a personal perspective that I would want to make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to feel that their voice has been heard. If that were to sway Dr. Jones, fine. If it's not, I understand. I mean, there was a specific agenda. I appreciate that. I just think it's prudent for us as representatives of the city school system, whose mission is to take care of the children and in turn support the parents in doing that, that it would be nice to hear from them. And 30 minutes of our day, can't make any promises that's going to change anything, but at least I do think it's prudent to make sure everybody has a chance to feel that their voice has been heard.
I'm looking at you, would you change your mind, or?
Or if there's anyone else who would have and counterpoint me, if someone else has a different opinion, I'm always open to hearing different opinions. But that's kind of, I understand Dr. Carter's motion, and I appreciate it. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she said on that matter, but I definitely understand her point, and I agree with her point.
I think part of the purpose of this meeting is to review the whole procedure, including the opportunities there have already been for community input.
And I understand, and I agree that I personally feel there have been lots of opportunities for community input, but I think it is prudent if there are some people that for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly, I'm not here to judge whether it was right or wrong, feel that their voice wasn't heard, 30 more minutes is not out of the realm. I'm certainly, we've all taken time of our schedules to be here today to give information and really set the record straight on some things that have been misinformed and some information that has been set out there that we don't feel is correct, set the record straight. I just don't think another 30 minutes, one way or the other, is gonna necessarily harm us, and if anything, it can do some good. And I do just think that if there are parents or Sandusky stakeholders that feel that their voice hasn't been heard, I certainly feel 30 minutes is appropriate to give them and allow them that opportunity. But I understand your position as well, that we feel we've done that and given them opportunity. I just don't think another 30 minutes is gonna be that detrimental to anyone here. And in fact, I think it would make some people feel better that at least their voice was heard.
I have no further comment.
All right, so the unanimous consent is not there. We move on to item E1, Facilities Master Plan, School Board Section. Attorney Towns?
Hello, Dr. Gupta.
Good evening, good afternoon. How are you? I move to the site, so
Yes,
floor is all yours.
as requested, I'm providing you with the legal authority specific to the question of who's responsible for closing, better referred to by the term consolidation of Lynchburg City Schools. Pursuant to Virginia Code Section 22.1-79, which outlines the powers and duties of school boards, it states in part that a school board in Virginia shall provide for the consolidation of school
No.
boundaries.
She can't hear you.
Excuse me, Attorney Towns. Dr. Gupta,
Yes,
we need to approve the agenda. The agenda has not been approved.
That distracted me, I apologize. So is there a motion to approve the agenda? I'm sorry.
So moved.
I was lost with your passionate speech.
So moved.
Second?
I'll second it.
Aye. Could we call the roll, please?
Mr. Jalil?
Yes.
Mr. Andrews? Mr. Charles?
No.
Dr. Day?
Yes?
Dr. Gupta?
Yes.
Dr. Carter?
No.
Mrs. Preston?
No.
Mr. DePaul?
Yes.
And Ms. Laurie?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-3.
Right, we're back to item E1. Attorney Towns, your audio was not clear, so we're losing you in between, man.
I don't know what you can do about that.
yes. Well, and I will say that if I'm not coming through clearly, that the Virginia Code sections that I cite are available on the Virginia, on the Lynchburg City Schools agenda website. I apologize not being able to be with you all in person. But as far as consolidation of schools, it is outlined the powers and duties of the school board in 22.1-79, that a school board shall provide for the consolidation of schools, and that further the supervision of school is vested in the school board, which can be found in Virginia Code Section 22.1-28 and in Article 8, Section 7 of the Virginia Constitution. So school boards in Virginia are responsible for the decision of whether and or how to consolidate schools. That a governing body can make a recommendation about the adoption of a plan for school consolidation. However, the ultimate responsibility for school consolidation lies with the school board.
Do you have more to say, Attorney Towns, or we're done with you?
No.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate it.
I think the point is that state law gives the school board the authority to make decisions about consolidation of schools. Am I correct?
That's what I gathered from her. The item E2 is Facilities Master Plan, Dr. Edwards and Dr. Day.
Go first? Okay. The Facilities Master Plan, one of the things that we listed under this section of the agenda is more of a historical timeline of all the things that have happened that led us up to this point. And our timeline starts at 2020, but I just wanted to take a pause to actually go back to 2019 when we had the Education Task Force. And one of the subgroups of the Education Task Force was a facilities subgroup. And while we were awaiting recommendations from the task force, and then COVID hit in March of 2020, the task force went on pause. Although we continued meeting via Zoom, other governmental agencies did not, and the task force did not meet. But one of the things that they did do prior to being put on pause was we started a walkthrough in our facilities, which led to a discussion about having a facility study conducted by an outside consultant. So the genesis started more with the task force, and then once COVID hit, we were on pause. And I do remember having a meeting when Dr. Whitaker was still at the city side, and we were at the school side. We met and we decided that at that point, even though we were in the middle of COVID, that was still an important task to do, that we wanted to move forward rather than wait till whatever the outcomes would have been. So we did move forward on the school side, working with the city, and then that's where our timeline is going to pick up. So the task force piece is not in our timeline, but I've asked Dr. Whitaker to kind of take us through that. But before I turn it over to Dr. Whitaker, I just wanted to.
What I had to contribute is just the very tail end of the decision-making process, so it seems appropriate for Dr. Whitaker to precede me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Edwards, and good evening, everyone. As Dr. Edwards said, I have been asked to just give a overview of the historical timeline of how we got to where we are, starting with that November 4th, 2020 vote by the school board to commission a study of the LCS facilities to think about what is the future of those facilities, what are the needs, what are the conditions of the buildings, and where do we need to go in terms of the complement of buildings that we have in the community. So I'm just going to kind of go through this because I think there's a lot of detail there. That document is provided on the board docs document as well. So after that November 4th, 2020 meeting where the school board voted to commission a study of LCS facilities, there was an RFP submitted to various firms. And ultimately, the school board selected the architectural firm Dominion 7 Architects to conduct the facility study. That's really the facility assessment report that we talk about, just really getting a good idea of the condition of the facilities, what is needed in them from a physical perspective, and understanding what the investments were needed from a capital perspective. You'll hear from Mr. Smith on I think of the next agenda item as the representative of Dominion 7, but did some really great work identifying the needs, and ultimately that led to a joint city council meeting on March 22nd, 2022. That Dominion 7 presented their final study report, or facility study report, and ultimately in that meeting there was a number of recommendations which I'm sure Mr. Smith will provide, but a primary one was that we needed to use an educational consultant to help us develop a vision for the larger picture of what the schools are. So what do we do in those buildings? And how does that interact and intersect with the condition of the buildings and where we need to make the investments that occur. That then sparked a series of community conversations. This is the first of three rounds of public meetings that occurred as a result of the facility study in April and May of 2022. Those occurred at Sandusky Elementary, Lincoln Elementary, Paul Monroe Elementary, R.S. Payne Elementary, as well as Providence Transformational Church International, as different opportunities for members of the community to engage with their representatives at the school division. That work was done, and the school division took seriously the recommendation from Dominion 7 to develop a relationship with an educational consultant. Then the next set of RFPs went out, and ultimately MGT of America was announced to provide LCS the facility scenarios, as well as a number of recommendations related to the programmatic vision of the community, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. That led to a joint meeting with City Council and the school board on March 28th. LCS provided an update to the facilities master plan. That was sort of the next iteration of that, just talking about process. In April of 2023, City Council members and school board members met with representatives from MGT to start that process that occurred on the week of April 4th. And then ultimately that led into the first survey of the community for the facilities master plan feedback that launched on April 25th. So that was open for about a month and had the opportunity for members of the community to provide feedback based on a number of sort of set questions by the consultant, providing some information on where the vision of what the school division needs to focus on is. They then used that information as they developed scenarios. But before they did that, in May of 2023, MGT hosted community engagement sessions at Bedford Hills, T.C. Miller, and Heritage Elementary Schools, open to the public. Additionally, there were 30-plus community organization meetings, and you've heard me say a couple of times that those community organizations range from the conservative parents of Lynchburg to the Lynchburg Queer Town Hall. So lots of representation from different parts of our community, different perspectives, different folks that have an important stake in the quality of our school division. So use all that information, and MGT then developed a series of 4 scenarios. LCS announced those scenarios in July of 2023, and then launched an additional survey to members of the community. We also held open houses at Paul Monroe, Sandusky, Heritage, and Darrington Elementary Schools to gather feedback on those scenarios. All of that then was collated into information that was provided to the school board and to City Council on the August 8th joint council meeting and school board meeting. And MGT presented their analysis along with the scenarios that they provided, the results of community feedback, as well as a review of some of the programmatic ideas that were being developed as we go forward. And then ultimately that led to the September 19th, 2023 vote for the school board, to move forward with scenario 3, which also included, in addition to what was provided by the consultant, provided an additional expansion to Bass Elementary School as well. So in summary, there were 3 rounds of public community meetings for community feedback. There were also 2 surveys that were provided, and the information was provided to the board. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Dix,
So I thought what my contribution here can be is just to explain what has happened between September, well, really after August 8th, leading to the board's decision on September 19th. At the beginning of August, the board had in hand all the reports, the scenarios, the collected comments from the several stages of community input that Dr. Wodeka just reviewed, and financial estimates for the scenarios. And we understood from the superintendent that because of the planning time needed in order to begin implementation in fall 2023, the board needed to come to a decision by November 1. So it was time for the board to move toward making an actual decision. And as the chair of the Facilities and Finance Committee, I thought it was that committee's place to start the decision process moving by getting a recommendation on the table for the board to discuss. So I presented to the Facilities and Finance Committee what I thought was the most rational way to proceed. This was on August 29. What I suggested was a new scenario based on closing both T.C. Miller and Deerington. That committee, the Facilities and Finance Committee, voted 2-1 to recommend it to the full board. So I then communicated that recommendation to the board at its September 5 meeting, explaining the motivation behind it, and documents attached to the agenda for September 5 board meeting, which are still there for anyone to look at who want to see them. That included a written explanation of the motivation behind what the Facilities and Finance Committee recommended, and some brief calculations that were part of the foundation of that recommendation. So at that point, the September 5 meeting of the board discussed that Facilities and Finance recommendation for some time, but did not come to a conclusion. Discussion on the topic was closed for that meeting, and we moved on to the rest of the agenda on the September 5 meeting. Financial estimates for the Facilities and Finance recommendation in the same format as those for MGT's 4 scenarios were prepared. Those are attached to item F2 in the agenda for the September 19th board work session, if anyone wants to see them. But in listening to reactions and comments about what Facilities and Finance had recommended, it seemed to me that the board and community members were not comfortable considering a scenario that was not one of MGT's 4, even though we had said all along that MGT's 4 scenarios were only to be a starting point and that a homegrown version might well be added to them. So I, acting only as an individual board member, not speaking for the Facilities and Finance Committee, made a motion at the September 19th board work session to proceed or to decide on scenario 3 is our selected way to move forward with an additional request for $15 million to pay for expansion and renovations at Bass Elementary. So why did I make that recommendation? To me, it seemed the closest to the Facilities and Finance Committee recommendation in terms of the anticipated operational savings and downsizing our overall student capacity. Why not scenario 4? Well, scenario 4 would have closed or converted to non-elementary school use Deerington, T.C. Miller, and Sandusky. It would have achieved more operational savings than the other scenarios, approximately $4.3 million, but that seemed pretty draconian to me. I thought that was just too much to close at once. So why not scenario 2? Scenario 2 would close just Deerington. That would give about $3 million in operational savings, but would not reduce our capacity to get us in the recommended 85 to 90% utilization range. So why not scenario 1? That would rebuild Sandusky, close Heritage Elementary, and move the Fort Hill Academy Alternative School into the Heritage Building. This is the scenario that had the most support in the community and parent comments. So should the board adopt it on that basis and not consider its merits any further? I think the board remains responsible for considering the financial efficiency of the school district over the long run. We, the board, have to consider the practical implications along with the community sentiment. There was a motion at the September 19th board work session to proceed with scenario 1 instead of scenario 3. And there was a lengthy discussion. I won't repeat the many considerations that were raised. If anyone's interested, you can view the video recording of that meeting on board docs. There was also a second motion. Well, I should say that first motion eventually came to a vote and was voted down. There was a second motion to make the board's decision contingent on the success of community groups to raise enough funds to keep one of the schools open. That motion also failed. So the original motion to proceed with scenario 3 plus a 15 million request for for Bass finally came to a vote, and it passed on a close 5-4 vote. So that is and remains the board's decision, controversial though it may be. The administration's implementation planning is getting off the ground, and the board will be hearing more about that soon. City Council has been informed of our decision, and like everyone else, is awaiting more details of the implementation plan before they can act on any aspect of it that involves them.
Dr. Edwards?
Dr. Day, just so that the record is clear, and I think I heard you, and maybe members of the public heard you when you were describing scenario 4 as closing or converting Deerington Sandusky Elementary School would close. And then I believe you said T.C. Miller, but it's Paul Monroe.
Oh, did I have that wrong?
Yeah.
Well, I apologize, that's
Yeah,
my mistake.
Just so the record,
Okay.
and we know the news media is here, so we want to
Okay,
make sure
yeah,
we get it.
if that's, I'm sure you're right, that's my mistake, I apologize for that.
Can I allow Q&As, Robert's rule?
You're the
Any
chair.
questions, but no political statements, just questions on the subject matter. Right. Thank you. Item number E3 is the Facilities Master Plan. We have Dominion 7 and MGT. Doc Edwards, which one will be the order?
Dominion 7.
Okay.
Blair.
Mr. Blair Smith is here.
Blair is here. And just before Mr. Smith speaks, and Dr. Wodeka alluded to us doing several community conversations and going out into the public. So the first round was done immediately after Mr. Smith did his report, and you actually gave us some recommendations at the end of your report, and it was your recommendations along with the information that you shared that was the content for those first 5, I think, community meetings. So just so that the public has a accurate connection to where your work fits in, as I call you fondly, consultant number 1.
Just wanted to clarify, Dr. Wodka, I received an email that we had 0 communication in respect of Sandusky. Based on your timeline, looks like you had 2 meetings at Sandusky Elementary, right?
There were 2 meetings, yes, sir.
So one was with Dominion 7 and one with MGT, or both with MGT?
No, the one in 2022 was before MGT, but I think the community conversations were more staff-led.
The first one was at, because we were talking about facilities, and we zoned them out in different areas, the first one that we actually had was at Sandusky Elementary School with Dominion 7. Once we
And then
Was it
after
summer
the
of
scenarios
22,
were
I believe.
developed, there was another one with MGT
NGT later.
at Sandusky, all right. The floor is all yours, sir.
Okay, well, thank y'all for having me tonight. I'm gonna kind of summarize our study. There's a lot of information in it. I'm not gonna try to rehash all of it, but it's there for anybody who wants to look at it or ask me questions. I guess I would start by saying you're probably wondering why you volunteered to be on the school board, because you're faced with a pretty difficult decision. And I commend you for tackling it, but it's hard, and I know that's the case. I don't have any opinion because I haven't followed it intimately, the MGT solutions, so I'm not really, I can't really give you much advice with those. Just a quick overview, so it's been very well documented, kind of what your problems are. We did the study in 1998 on the secondary schools, and a lot of things that were uncovered then were then uncovered in 2021, so some things haven't changed. You have a bunch of buildings, if we look at your division as a whole, that need modernization. There's no question about that. Many of them, most of them, how they were designed does not fit into how we're teaching today, the pedagogy, right? And your enrollment's been declining. My first project started 34 years ago this fall, which was an addition at Paul Monroe Elementary School. I heard about declining enrollment 30 years ago. There's another impact of all of this is that there are huge financial implications with operating and maintaining schools, whether you have one school or you have 20 schools. And so that's something that is somewhat overwhelming for you and is also overwhelming for the city. I will tell you this, that your problems aren't unique. And I'll say it again, your problems aren't unique. Your neighbors, the surrounding counties have faced this, other Virginia cities have faced this, so you're not alone in going through this process. Tonight, though, my focus is purely going to be on the elementary schools, since that seems to be the hot button. I'm not going to really worry about the other middle and high school issues at this point in time. So let's look first at the demographics. As I mentioned, you know, we hear about declining enrollments. It seems like forever. It's always brought up at budget season. It's one of those things. And so your overall enrollment's declining, but another piece of this is that where people live inside the city has changed over the last 40 years. They don't live in the downtown area. They've moved west, right? So that's a challenge for you. So you end up with having schools in areas that don't have a huge population base. And so I pulled your fall membership numbers. And so to give you an example, Bass has 175 students, Darrington 160, T.C. Miller 208. And they're all located, you know, on this side of town. The average school size when we did our study was about 324, but the capacity of those, the capacity average was 400. So what does that mean? That means you have too many classrooms with not enough students in them. And because of that, they're not efficient. The schools that have the highest capacity utilization based on our study was Heritage, Sheffield, Sandusky, Perrymont, and Paul Monroe. Once again, they're all over there. When we look at the conditions of your buildings, the average age of your elementary schools and Hutcherson is over 70 years old. The average date of construction for those is 1951. So what does that mean? That means that Harry Truman was president. We're in the middle of the Korean conflict, and it was the year that I Love Lucy debuted, okay? That's the schools where we're trying to teach our children in today. And that's the challenge. The other problem that you have is you've never had, you don't have, and you will not have enough financial resources to take care of what you've got. It's just the reality of it. The city council will never give you the money that you need. There'd be so much catch-up work that you would have to do that it would exhaust everything that you could possibly get from them. And so the challenge you have is if you have a chiller that goes out at a school, you have to scramble to find money to do that if it's not scheduled. Forget about replacing the system as a whole and really getting it to where it would be a newer, more efficient system. You don't have the money to do that. The other challenge that you have as a division is finding staff who are technicians who can maintain what you have. They're just not there. They can make a better living going to work for, you know, some other commercial entity and not the school system. And so taking care of them, finding people is hard. I kind of had forgotten this, but these are two staggering numbers. Your elementary schools, including Hutcherson, are almost 700,000 square feet. And they're sitting on 147 acres of land. And this is what you're taking care of. To kind of put some perspective of the financial burden that you're facing, we ran some individual numbers when we did our study on replacing the roofs as they come due for all the buildings in your division. That number in 2023 was $28 million just to replace roofs. So these numbers are they're absolutely staggering. Compliance with handicap accessibility is a huge issue in your schools, and certainly you have a lot of students and faculty and staff that may be handicapped. The two best schools to expand because they have available land, most of your schools are landlocked. Think about Payne, it's landlocked. Think about Bedford Hills, other than replacing the modular classrooms, there's no room to expand. But Bass and Lincoln are your two best opportunities to expand the size of the school. In terms of our assessment, Sandusky scored the worst in terms of its condition. I mentioned that your schools are old and Harry Truman was president. So from an educational programming standpoint, one of the things we looked at were the size of your classroom spaces, right? And so they need to be the right size. And so only 4 of your elementary schools have the correct size classroom that meets or exceeds the minimum that the Department of Education recommends. Your kindergarten, first grade classroom should also have a toilet, and many of those do not, in-classroom toilet. Another thing that has changed over the years are the needs for specialized instruction. It could be behavior issues, it could be academic support, it could be anything and everything. And so these specialty classrooms and providing office space for those people, they just don't exist in a proper way in your schools. They may be in a closet or something's been cobbled together to create those. Classrooms need the proper equipment and furniture. They need exterior learning areas. You have 5 elementary schools that have satellite kitchens. Those need to have full service kitchens, but hence the problem, you don't have room for them. The other thing that's has becoming pretty much a necessity in elementary schools is having extended learning areas where somebody, an aide can pull a student outside the classroom that's nearby and do some one-on-one instruction. You don't have those in most cases. So when I thought about what our recommendations would be, the recommendations are kind of just the reality of the situation. So since 1871, the city has built 47 schools. And most of those buildings no longer serve as a school. 20% have been demolished. And many of those have been closed due to their age, their location, and sometimes it was deemed that a replacement school was better. No one ever complains that EC Glass got a new school, right? But actually, it did. The other thing I would kind of comment to you is the school boards here in the past have closed schools. It hasn't been easy. You'll probably close schools today, and school boards of the future for Lynchburg City will close schools for a variety of reasons, okay? Bottom line is you have too many schools and too many elementary schools. Many of them are too small just to really provide a quality educational environment. All of them need to be modernized. And there are financial limitations to updating these buildings. So even if you had a plan to do whatever the plan will be, it's just gonna take time because the city just doesn't have, they win the lottery and you can't happen overnight. So I would encourage you to look at 2 primary goals. Both of these are accomplished through modernization. Number 1, parents care about the safety of their kids. You gotta do that first. And secondly, they expect you to provide a quality educational environment. Quality educational environment will also help you have teachers that you can hire because they'd rather work in something that is not 1951 vintage. So something to consider there. So yeah, do you need to consolidate and modernize? That would be our recommendation, yes. But we believe that by doing that, you can have a well-rounded opportunity for your students, reduce cost, and help to prepare for an ever-changing future. So that kind of concludes my comments. It was a real quick summary. I'd offer that we still have some time on our agreement with you. We're happy to help vet through some of these things as you develop the plan. We're always happy to work with you. And I'll take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Blair Smith? Mr. Andrews?
What were the elementary schools that you listed early in your presentation? Heritage, Lincoln, Sheffield? I'm sorry.
The ones that are most, that have the highest utilization, the Heritage, Sheffield, Sandusky, Paramount, and Paul Monroe.
And then I have a question. And you said which ones were in the worst conditions?
Sandusky was in the worst condition, followed by Lincoln.
So when you say worst condition, which criteria are you using?
So we looked at, the outside of the building, the site. We looked at the architectural components, which would be the exterior building envelope, the finishes inside, all of those pieces and parts. We looked at the electrical system, the mechanical system, which is the heating, cooling, and the plumbing systems. We looked at all of those, and when you do an average score, those are the 2 that had the worst score. Yes, sir.
So Lincoln is the best expandable.
but one of the worst conditions?
The reason that it's in bad condition is a couple of things there. Your heating, air conditioning systems are shot. They need to be replaced today. And so that really drags that down. You also have kindergarten classrooms, which you have to walk outside to get to. So that's another challenge. And then you have that 1960s octagon that is on the right-hand side of the school that just needs to be torn down and start all over.
Do you grade A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C?
Yeah, we, if you go back and look at our study, we kind of use that, or I can send you some of the previous reports we did, and we kind of, we gave them a score just like a traditional score. So if you were, 70 to 79, you were a C type of thing, yeah, so we did do that.
My question is, if something like an air conditioning unit or two being bad in a school can drop it from a B to a C grade, and a wide hallway in a school can drop it from a B to a C grade, aren't those unequal things? And is that something that you?
I would say it's not that simple, because we scored every component. I mean, so think about it from an electrical standpoint. We gave a grade for the power. Do you have enough power in the classrooms? We have a grade for the lighting. We have a grade for the low voltage systems, like the fire alarm. I mean, all of those things ended up getting a grade, and so they were kind of averaged out that way. Safety things would have graded out as more of a concern than something like a wide hall or a narrow hall or something like that, right? Any building code issues would have changed things a little bit.
And so the recommendation of modernization for the 4 elementary schools in one of the scenarios, it came from you, or?
No, that was from MGT.
Okay. And you looked at that and you think that that would be effective in bringing
As I
that?
said, I haven't followed, I don't know enough about the background of how MGT came up with their options, so I have no idea. I mean,
We'll have MGT here in just a minute.
Scenarios were developed by MGD. Their
Yeah.
work stopped when MGD took over. Mr. Andrews, go ahead.
You also mentioned that there are four schools that do have the right size classrooms. What schools were they?
I don't have the list with me. They would be the ones that have been recently modernized. So like Sheffield would be one, Bedford Hills would be one. I can't, without going back and I can't tell you. I can look it up and let you know. But if you think about Bedford Hills, there was a fire there in November of '91. And so a wing was destroyed. We rebuilt that. And I mean, it was just completely changed. So Bedford Hills and Sheffield were the same basic floor plan. And they were heavily modified to get them to be correct.
Thank you.
But I can look that up. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Based on, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Based on your study, and based on, I'm sure you've looked at the scenarios that we were given, are there any scenarios that you are drawn to?
I don't have any, I just don't know enough about MGT's scenarios to give you a like number 3 versus 2 versus 4. I don't know. I mean, you were rattling off, Dr. Day, you were rattling off what was included. And that would be something I couldn't do. I just don't know. Yeah, sure, I mean, there are probably, 20 ways to skin the cat, for example, but, I can't give you any opinion on it.
Mr. FJ, you asking a question, or?
Yes, how many schools above the number that we should have has it been reduced by, from the previous established number of schools per 10,000 students? I'm trying to see if it was 16 schools at 10,000 students, what should it be now that we have 7,000?
So let me give you a perspective. Over the last 5 years, the average elementary school size in the Commonwealth of Virginia is 800 students, and you were at 324. And what, I mean, if I was to ask you a question, what do you think the reason for that is? because they're more efficient to operate being larger. And you can design an elementary school to be broken into smaller components so it doesn't feel large, but it's the cost of doing business that localities are faced with.
Has any school district gone K through 6?
Oh, I'm sure, yeah, they're,
In your experience, have you seen that that is more cost efficient than K through 5 and then 6 through 8th and then?
I wouldn't stray from the middle school concept. I'm aware of schools that are K-8, and they may be, in a area of a county that's, kind of far away, and it was just, from a transportation standpoint, it was more efficient to do that way. I would say there are not many K-6 schools. I think most of them are going to be the middle school concept, 6th, 7th, and 8th.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, Mr. Smith, just so, before you go, sorry, just want to make sure that we kind of tie it back together, because at the end of your first set of work with us, you gave us some recommendations as part of Task 4, and there were 3 potential options that were in, and this is in the documentation too for the folks who need to go back to the paper, but I just want to confirm where you left off before we transitioned to MGT, so I can sort of make that bridge. The first option you gave us, potential option 1, was focused on operational efficiency. And in that option, it was what you just said about building larger and newer elementary, and this was my favorite part because it was schools, plural, that we as a community may want to look at building more than one school. There were schools. Also included in that were school closings, consolidations, renovations, attendance zone changes, some additions to schools for their gyms, fine arts, classrooms, repurposing schools, and continued maintenance on schools. So that was option 1 that we were left with considering. 2, you called it the middle ground, which was build 1 new school, same sort of conditions in terms of closing, consolidation, attendance zone changes, renovations, God bless you, and some additions at several schools to make this possible, and of course repurposing some of the schools. And then the third option was focused on our existing facilities, and in your third option, there was no construction of any new school. However, there were renovations and additions to multiple schools, the same repurposing schools, and again, school closing, consolidation, renovations, and attendance zone changes. So that, when we were doing the work in 2022, that's kind of where the board was considering like possibility of building multiple new schools, although bigger, 1 school, or focusing on renovations at our existing schools and maybe some additions on those schools. Combining that with the educational programming piece, which was the reason for the second consultant to really talk about what kinds of programming, considerations, things that we want our students to experience. So for the listening public, especially if you're new here and you're wondering why, after we've done this work with 1 consultant, a decision wasn't made, this sort of funneled us into the next consultant who we're going to hear from to talk about how do you use your facilities with educational programming. So I just want to thank you for the work that you did do, and just sort of remind everybody that at that point when we went out to the community the first time, that was the information that we had, with the promise of coming back for a second set.
Correct. And the first option obviously takes a lot of money to do that. If money is no object, then that's probably your best scenario, but the reality is that's probably not attainable.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you,
Y'all have a good evening.
Dr. Edwards?
Yes, so that brings us to consultant number 2, Lance Richards, who I think is on Zoom and not in person, who had the task of not only reviewing everything from the first work that we did with Dominion 7, but also looking at programming from the standpoint of what services we're providing our students. Also, best practices. What are the best practices going forward? Because this is a master plan, and we're looking years forward. So, Mr. Richards, I am going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about MGT and scenarios that we arrived at.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I have the reverb, don't I? All right. Well. Okay, I'll get started unless someone makes me stop. All right, so MGT was brought on board in January of 2023 as a part of the second phase of the development of the LCS master plan. We were looking at programmatic and community needs in order to provide recommendations to your school community. We reviewed and analyzed a large amount of data about your school division and overall community, identifying a variety of great strengths, some opportunities for improvements, as well as some challenges, specifically in terms of your portfolio of school buildings that you operate and the associated costs. Furthermore, we participated in a comprehensive community engagement data gathering process, which included community group conversations with over 30 small and large community groups, school board members, and city council members. On a side note, your community should be applauded for the efforts made in the area of community outreach. We identified a number of recommendations for Lynchburg, which included both facility recommendations as well as programmatic ideas. And these were the scenarios presented at the open houses and the August 8th joint meeting of the board and council. Some of the programmatic recommendations, which were reviewed in public with the board and council, included things like expansion of your CTE programs within the existing footprint, additional science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, those STEAM opportunities at the elementary and middle schools, reimagining your Go schools and the alternative school programs. And in a key element of this, making changes to your attendance boundaries for closer to home transportation was a key area of interest. This effort would better allow families to participate in their child's education, and closer to home was a topic that continued to be brought up as there was strong support for attendance boundary changes. Ultimately, this work led to a vote by the school board in September selecting scenario 3 or a version thereof. And at MGT, we have one final task in partnership with LCS, which is in assisting in the development of the implementation plan, specifically considering the student attendance zone assignments, and that would be citywide, impacting all schools. And that process will require the school board to clarify a few questions that Dr. Wotica will be reviewing.
Questions for Mr. Richard, Dr. Richards? Dr. Richards, were you working alone, or there was a team from Lynchburg working with your company?
Well, on the MGT side of things, of course, we've got a team of former educators, facilities folks, and those sorts of things that help me in the process. On the Lynchburg City Schools side of it, we worked alongside with Dr. Wotica, I'm sorry, and as well as Ken White, other folks within your administrative portfolio, as well as community.
So looks like there was a joint team of city as well as the school system to work with you.
Yes, sir. This was a city and division effort.
Mr. Jillian, I have a question.
Mr. Richards, why do none of the scenarios you presented through MGT Consulting address the $7.2 million deficit that is the purpose for us doing this in the first place?
To be very honest with you, sir, It was only at the last school board meeting that I heard the number 7.2 million.
There's been, okay, but there's been a number, there's probably a number of people that are associating the two together. Like, a lot of the facility studies, of course, you need to modernize them. But the the savings of the scenarios and operational costs don't reach what we need to reach, which is $7.2 million for next year. So you haven't heard that up to this, what you just mentioned recently?
Let me take, what happened is, as I mentioned in the last school board meetings, the facilities train was going in this direction, and then 1550 train was going in this direction. Last April or May, we had a meeting to see how do we come up with that $5.6 million needed to give our employees minimum $15 an hour wage and minimum $50,000 starting salary. And there were different savings plans presented at that. The meeting happened at Heritage High School, and different plans were presented. And one of the options was to close 2 schools. So that's where, at that point, these two things collided, that should we be using the savings from school closure to make up for that 7.2? But the board decided at that time not to make a decision to close, to wait for the facility study to make its recommendation before we move in that direction. Now, having said that, we still gave 1547 instead of 1550. I'm looking at 2 of you because some of the members are new and some are carryover from last year. So we gave 1547, but we used $4 million of coronavirus money to fund it. And then I'm looking at Dr. Carter because it's about 3 years ago, we funded $3.2 million of funding, also using the coronavirus money. And the coronavirus money is going to evaporate next year. So we need to backfill that $7.2 million hole in our budget. So these 2 trains, it's like perfect timing when they're colliding, but they're 2 separate things. But 7.2 is a legit number. It comes from 4 million being used to backfill this 1547 plan, and 3.2 for behavior therapists, virtual academy. There's a whole array of things which were funded using the coronavirus money at that time. Dr. Day?
So I think the short answer is, while we hope that the facility study will lead us to some savings, we've never tried to saddle the facility study with the whole $7.2 million. We realize that it might contribute to us resolving that, but it's not the only answer to it. Those additional funds needed to cover the $7.2 million are going to have to come from other places as well.
Was there a session or a special meeting on the discussions for that particular train?
Which particular?
Where all the other funds are gonna come from?
No.
So there hasn't been a study?
We know that this is an issue, but, well,
It has been brought up in different meetings all over.
but we will have to deal with it when we get to budget deliberations this year.
So it didn't come early in the year before we start discussing this?
Finance and Facilities Committee, first the administration will look at the budget, if you look at the process, and they will bring it to the Finance and Facilities sometime January, February.
Could that have been done earlier, or can that still be moved earlier?
You work in a structure.
There was a budget calendar that was provided at our previous board meeting that detailed month by month what the different things needed to happen each month as part of the budget development process. We talked about this at the Facilities and Finance Committee meeting earlier this afternoon. And it's a lengthy process. It begins at the school level with principals formulating what their needs are, and then that coming together through multiple stages, public hearings. It's a lengthy process. It takes all year long. It's already starting at the school level. It'll come to the board level probably in January or something like that. We'll start having public hearings at this level about it. But it's not something we do in a matter of a couple of weeks. It takes the full year.
Budget development is not school board. The superintendent will present us a budget through the process by collecting from ground up, from buildings to the central office, to the finance and facilities, to the school board.
All right, well, just concerning the COVID, knowing that that was gonna end, there were no discussions like this, budgetary discussions from beforehand.
There
was
were
scheduled to
discussions
end
during the
in January.
presentation. There was a 8-1 vote, and I can take for one. I was one of those who voted against it. But, you know, the board approved at that time, knowing they'll become fixed costs.
We kicked the
No,
can
no.
down the road.
Yeah, not, yes, I'm saying after that, there was not a pre-planned discussion on how we're going to resolve this in the future. But you're saying that it's gonna be done in January. What I'm saying is, why couldn't it have been?
Discussion means it has been brought up in the board. If you watch the board meetings for last 3 years, it has been brought up many times. But the action is when the money is flowing in, people feel good about it, nobody wants to cut it.
Yeah, I think the answer is no, we don't, we've never had a specific plan for how we're gonna do that. We know we need to, but we've never tackled the details.
I wonder if that was done earlier than this month, if there could have been another scenario edited to make up the gap that we're missing between what this offers us as cost savings and what would be discovered, or would have been discovered from that type of deliberation.
This will not offer you, first school closure, no matter which you pick as based on MGT, provides about $2.5 million. The second school provides 700. The third school does 400,000.
We'd have to close half the schools.
Yeah, so if I go by your logic, then you basically gotta go much deeper than that.
Yeah.
So the objective here was not to make up for that $7.2 million. That will be a wrong narrative to put out there. As I said, these two are two different trains. They were going, but they collided in that heritage meeting. Mr. Andrews was sitting beside me at that time, and we said, no, we are not closing schools at that point in time. So the 7.2 savings, based on that, to 2.5, 700, 400, you gotta go way down to make that. So the objective is not 7.2. That's for the superintendent to figure out, and the finance and facilities to work with her to come to that 7.2 million.
So what I'm
That's not-
gathering is basically, in order to keep the 1547, you have to go with the scenarios.
We have some,
Fine.
we're gonna have to,
Closing schools.
See, it's very easy, and I'm not be, at that point in time, it's very important for the district to do 1550. And two of you were there. It was the board's intention that we were losing teachers left and right. So we had to do something with salary. It was a temporary stopgap arrangement in light of the losses we were having on the revenue side. We don't control our revenues as a school district. We depend on different fiscal agencies to give us money. So it's not like I can go out there and give everybody $55,000 if I want to. But the question is, as a board, it becomes very difficult, but it's very easy to do a Monday morning quarterback saying, push wood, but at that time, we looked at different scenarios. And end of the day, it was decision we have to backfill through coronavirus money, and then we'll have to make some tough decisions going forward. Questions? Mr. Rich is gone?
yes.
Other questions before?
No,
he's still here.
He's
He's still here.
just logged.
I'm here, I just didn't think you needed my head lording over your shoulder.
Oh, Lord. You have anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Dr. Richards? You know, there was a question, remember, Dr. Day and I called you about taking a deeper dive into the data. And we had a lengthy conversation for the public's interest. Would you like to share what's your opinion at that point in time? I know I'm putting you on spot, but because we were hearing, let's take a deeper dive, let's take a deeper dive, let's revisit all these things. And
Well, I would echo your sentiment. I don't feel that you can cut your facilities and operations to the level where you recover the number of dollars that you were speaking of earlier. There's not a practical way to do that and serve the students of your community. In addition, the scenarios, I know there's been some concern about picking different areas and different items from the scenarios, but it was intended for those to be a starting point, a conversation point, so the board could then assess what the needs of the community would be and make a decision to go forward. I know it's very tough. These are very hard decisions and very hard discussions to have with your communities.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Warga, you want to say something?
Yeah, so if there are other questions, I just want to kind of review the next steps for the community, as well as start to give you some preview of some feedback that we're going to ask you for over the next several weeks. So as Dr. Richards said, we know and understand that the school board selected scenario 3 for our path forward as where we're going. And so certainly rightfully so, there's a lot of conversation regarding the closure or conversion of the schools in that scenario. That's certainly the most salient component of that. But there are a number of other items in scenario 3 for which we do need some clear guidance from the board. We're not going to ask you tonight to make any decisions or really even to have discussion about them, but we want to preview what some of those questions are going to be so that you have some time to ponder those questions, and we'll also provide that information to you in writing as well before next week's school board meeting. So there's a few points we want you to think about for scenario 3. We do need these sort of questions answered so that as we develop an implementation plan and then ultimately develop a master plan document that really shows the future school boards and administrators where we thought we were going, so we can have that together so we would know where those things are. So there are sort of 5 major questions that the board will need to consider, and 4 of which really will be over the next several weeks. So the fact is you sort of may individually feel that a number of these questions were already answered, or you may think about what the guidance may be or what the decision would be, but we do need the board to sort of take an action to officially give that guidance so that we are all on the same page and we're all moving in the same direction as well. So,
And that action is not tonight.
that action is not tonight. Again, we're just previewing this for you so that you have some opportunity to give some feedback in future opportunities. So we see this master plan.
Just wanted to clarify one more thing. So as we've been saying, this is the how part of the implementation. And how part, as we talked this morning, is the superintendent's lane. That's where the administration will make a recommendation to the school board.
That's right. And so we just want to, what we're doing is making sure that the intent of the board is clear among where we're going. So we just want to make sure we're all moving in the right direction, in the same direction, and we're clear about what sort of implementation plan we should be developing. So we see the master plan as it's been discussed in sort of 2 or more phases. 3 of those questions relate to sort of a first phase of this process, and they are as follows. So first of all, scenario 3 includes the expansion of pre-K. That was a component that was voted on. What we'd like to understand is what the board's intent on that component of the scenario is, and again, identify a number of potential paths forward that we see, one of which is just remaining the status quo. So not expanding pre-K using TC Miller or converting TC Miller to move the existing pre-K classes to that site to make more of an early learning center, or in fact expanding those pre-K classes. Scenario 3 also includes the idea of expanding CTE, and we want to make sure we understand what you mean by that, and whether or not this is intentionally that we should be planning to build a new space, or if it's expanding programs in their existing footprints. Scenario 3 also includes close-to-home zoning, and the board also decided to request the expansion of Bass Elementary School. Again, we'd like to understand the expectation and desire of timing on this. I know there has been a lot of conversation related to the operating budget and how that impacts that, but again, this is a master plan that will serve the school division for probably a decade or more. We want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as timing goes. We sort of see 4 options here if this is the direction we're going, ultimately dependent on what happens with the Bass expansion, and those would be sort of closing both schools next year. It could be closing Miller next year and leaving Sandusky open for a year. It could mean closing Sandusky next year and leaving TC Miller open for the year, or leaving them both open for a year until such time as the expansion can be completed at Bass if it's funded by City Council. So there's a couple of nuances there that we just need to get on the same page to make sure we understand what the expectation is as well. So generally speaking, just that question is about whether or not the board will consider phased approaches to this implementation or not, and if not, that's okay. We just have to know that. We have to know the direction we're going. for us moving forward. And so we'll present some pros and cons to each one of those as well next week. So that's the phase 1 questions, right? So pre-K, CTE, and timing. The future phase question, this is sort of my question 4, revolves around the intent of the board on expansions and renovations. So Mr. Smith talked about some of those potential options before. Again, scenario 3 includes a number of expansions and renovations. We need to understand whether that is the intent of the board or whether there is more of the safety and maintenance focus. Again, just an affirmative vote of what the board looks to do, because that just is a little bit different than what we did. So those are the major questions that we sort of need to answer in the next several weeks. We're going to bring them back to you next week. Again, we'll provide those in writing. And what we'll do in the next steps is to have a guided discussion on each one of those items. We hopefully will come to a resolution by the October 24th meeting so that we can continue to develop that zoning plan and all the other plans, as well as the capital plan that needs to be submitted to the city as well. And we'll ask that you discuss and consider these questions and also identify any other points of information that you need in order to answer that question, right? So we do understand that there may be pieces of information or data that you would like to have in order to make the decisions that are outlined here. And so we would just ask that you consider that, think through what you might need, and you certainly don't have to tell us today, but we could do that conversation next week as well. And then after that guidance, the board provides that guidance, there will be sort of 2 major components that will come next in the master planning process. The first one, of course, is related to the rezoning process. What we'd like to do is get some guidance based on what we talked about before in a rezoning analysis, and we'd like to have options for the community and for the board to consider in January, as well as hopefully be able to make, hopefully for the school board to make a decision in early March for our zoning plan for the coming year, whatever that may be. And again, we remain committed to engaging with and getting feedback from the community, and ultimately, though, of course, we understand that these are the board's decisions. And the last item that will be coming forth is that we will use the MGT recommendations to provide a programmatic vision for what LCS is hoping for in the future for the board and the community to consider. We're thinking about a lot of big picture things that we'll be really starting to have a great conversation about. These are the sort of visionary work that we really want to be doing. Again, these are tough conversations regarding the schools that we're in, as well as the attendance zones and those sorts of things. But we also have the opportunity in this master plan to craft a vision for how our programmatic alignment can be developed in the remaining schools, as well as throughout the K-12, actually pre-K-12 programs that we provide. So that's sort of our path forward, and certainly take any questions on that. But again, no discussion or decisions that you have to make tonight, but I just want to give you that preview as we move forward. Yes, sir.
Dr. Day.
So you're going to give us something in writing and then October 10th, a week from today, at our regular board meeting, we will begin this guided conversation that you've described? Okay.
Mr. Jalil?
Dr. Richards is going to help LCS with rezoning. When he said all schools, does that include the middle and high?
No, so we're talking about the elementary schools.
Right.
So of the remaining, if you go forward with scenario 3, the remaining 9 elementary schools will be a part of that conversation.
Can I just comment on it too? And I'm not sure if, I do not see one up here, but is that a map of the elementary school zones back there on the?
And Austin, I think, can put it up.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So just as we talk about close to home zoning, that is going to be a real intricate task, just because of this is a map of our current zone, and I know that's difficult to see, but we will be taking the cardboard versions out when we do public community engagements. But as you look at this particular map, each color is a different school zone, so you can see where some areas in our division are further away from the school than they attend. And the reason why this is a very important conversation, and I know it is extremely relevant to the 3 schools that are being that have been talked about, T.C. Miller, Sandusky, and Bass right now, because of the decision. However, close to home zoning most likely will affect every school. So at some point, either a neighborhood, a block, a street, a complex, or something based on how we have to go about the proposal may see a change in schooling in some point in the future, which is another reason why Dr. Wodeka said, but in January, we want to come back out to community and make sure everybody can see the existing map, but also what the proposal may be, because it will affect more than just the 3 schools that we have been talking about with the board's decision, and most likely all of our elementary schools will be affected by it. So just wanted to make sure everybody understood. It's on our website too, if anybody wants to get a copy of that.
I was surprised by these questions because we had a meeting this morning and I had no idea this how thing will come before October 10th. This thing is on the agenda for October 10th, these questions. But having said that, the board doesn't have data on heat maps, how to rezone. So what do you expect from board to do? Come back with a solution to you or?
We're not asking you to make any decisions, certainly in the next couple of weeks on zoning or make any recommendations on how that might occur. These are really policy discussion questions that relate to how we want to go about doing things, because they do really change how we go about the implementation plan. Certainly don't expect you to make any recommendations on how zoning is to occur. That's the work that MGT is going to do.
But I would, this is just my opinion, to channel it through the Finance and Facilities Committee to take a deeper dive into it, and then we have a broader
I
discussion.
don't know that the Finance and Facilities Committee has any special expertise beyond this.
But
He's
this is
saying,
very-
I think what he's saying is the way I'd say it as a mathematician, what's the algorithm by which we assign these zones? And that's a policy issue.
Yep.
Then the actual working out of the details, once we know the basic procedures we're following, that's the thing that
Yeah.
MGT and the other people.
They can do the technical work, right?
Yeah.
But the school board really has to make the community decisions that.
Yeah,
are related.
yeah, right.
And then, Dr. Richards, you still there? He left.
That's fine.
Yes, sir.
So,
He is there.
I think the first question maybe you can ask, expansion of pre-K and CTE, and that has been asked, closure or expansion, you had in every scenario. Could you explain what does it mean? Does it mean close and then expand, or is it not close and expand? What was your understanding?
No, I'm not real clear on your, on the misconception there. No, you're gonna have to expand your CTE, core offerings.
So you're saying use that building, if it's an empty building for CTE?
I don't think he's being specific about how we're going to
Oh,
do it. That's the issue.
No.
Oh,
I'm just, in terms of CTE, and I'm sorry for the echo,
and you are engaged for rezoning,
the
right?
question was that you could determine that facility would be adequate for CTE, and that would be good for your community. I'm not sure that an existing building would be sufficient or meet the needs versus a purpose-driven facility for CTE.
Okay.
That could be located closer to one of the main hubs of your high schools.
You'll be bringing back on October 10th, right? It's one of the agenda items for discussion. Right, thank you. Questions for Dr. Wodeka? Looks like we are at the end, right?
So
You have
you'll
anything
just
else?
send us the questions and we'll look at them between now and October 10th to come
And
back
then
with
it'll
any.
be published to the community as well.
Okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Thank you.